Are you considering managing your own investment property? Well, you'll want to see this.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Scenes.
Okay, so you're either considering purchasing rental property, or maybe you already own some rental property and you're considering managing it yourself. Let me just be clear from the top, lots of people go it alone. But today on this episode of Behind the Scenes, we're going to chat about the top 3 reasons why you may consider hiring a professional property manager to do that for you. The 3 reasons are liability, time, and money. So let's get into it. So for this first segment, we're going to talk a bit about the liability. And for that, I am honored to have here today Adam Bungay, attorney at law. He's been in practice for over 15 years. And I would say maybe about a third of your business is real estate and landlord-tenant related. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, about a third of my practice between those 2 focus areas. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to your insights. Let's jump right in. Let's talk about, if we can, let's talk about lease agreements to begin with.
Sure. I can't help but thinking about my landlord-tenant professor in law school, early 2000s, and he said, really, there's only two rules in landlord-tenant. 1, always get it in writing. 2, never sleep with your landlord, which in this case, it's, never sleep with your tenant. I have held those rules close all these years, and I have not violated either one of them. But the first part obviously is the important part. The second part's kind of a joke, although it has been, in some discrimination cases, it has been an issue when there's been a little bit closer relationship than maybe people would have intended originally. So from a 50,000 foot view, written lease it's memorializing the expectations of the parties. And really this applies not only to landlord-tenant, but construction and real estate and really any kind of high risk, investment, either in time or money, right? We want to know what yardstick do we use to measure the actions of the parties? Who is responsible for what? We might say, well, it's a rental, right? It's easy. The tenant pays rent, they can live in the building. There's really, everybody kind of knows what that's all about. Well, yeah, I mean, if we say the tenant is going to pay $2,000 a month, then it's kind of hard to have a misunderstanding there. But there's 1,000 things. There's 1,000 things that you could end up having a misunderstanding over, right? And those misunderstandings, especially when there's some dollars attached to them, those are the beginnings of most conflicts, right? Most conflicts start as a misunderstanding between the parties, between expectations. The second thing in a landlord-tenant context that makes it particularly important to have a written lease is if you have to evict someone, okay? So the landlord-tenant law allows for a shortened timeline to get relief from the court than almost any other cause of action, also almost any other type of lawsuit. So if I filed a lawsuit against Aaron Janus today for breach of contract in King County, I get a trial date the day I file that is 12 or 13 months out, okay? And so I have to wait 12 or 13 months for a decision from the court on my breach of contract action against Mr. Janus, okay? Well, obviously that doesn't work for tenants, for landlords who need to get possession of their properties back and start collecting rent from a new tenant. So the landlord-tenant law statute provides for a shortened timeline. It's 30 or 40 days instead. Well, to get that nice short timeline, your case has to be essentially airtight. So if it's for failure to pay rent, you need to prove that there was a lease and that they didn't pay, right? Or if it's for some other problem, some other breach of the lease. They weren't supposed to have a dog, but they have a dog. They were supposed to keep the place clean, and you've given them warnings and they can't keep the place clean. You have to prove to the court, A, that was that was a rule. B, that the tenant agreed to the rule. And then C, that the tenant broke the rule. Well, when you have a written lease, those first two are easy. When you don't have a written lease, those first two are very difficult, because 9 times out of 10, if you go in and you say, Your Honor, the tenant knew there was no smoking in this property. We talked about it a bunch of times, and there's no written lease. The tenant's going to say, we never talked about smoking. And then what happens is you don't get what's called a writ of restitution, which is the actual document that you take to the sheriff for the eviction, right? Restitution means return the property to the owner. You get that matter set over for trial because there's a question of fact. And in the law, a question of fact means one person says A, the other person says B. The court can't tell because there's no documentation who is right. And so we need to actually have a trial where testimony gets taken, and then the judge can decide who is lying and who is not. The judge can't decide who's lying and who's not in a summary proceeding in it for eviction. Okay. So then you have to do a trial, and you're talking a minimum, $10,000. So having a written lease not only, is a robust way, I guess, to document these dozens or hundreds of different responsibilities between the parties, but it is key to avoiding having your eviction take 90 or 120 days and cost, $10,000 or $15,000. Number one, you cannot know it all, right? You're not a landlord-tenant attorney. It would not be worth the time to become a landlord-tenant attorney, or even to, read enough and study enough to even if you didn't go to law school, but to be equivalent, right? To have all the Fair Housing Act and the City of Seattle stuff and the Washington State Landlord-Tenant Act, and then the common law stuff. Landlord-tenant is in derogation of common law, and therefore it is strictly construed. Well, what does that mean? Well, it wouldn't be worth trying to figure, the amount of time that it would take you to figure out. You could make a lot more money doing something else, or have a lot of fun doing something else. Knowing where the Landlord-Tenant Act is and how to access it and reading it for yourself so that you can understand on a specific issue, great. But really, it's having a good resource to go figure out the answer. Okay, you can't know it all, but knowing where to go, right? And whether that is an association, whether that is an attorney, whether that's a property manager, it's really kind of up to you. These rules change all the time. They change all the time, especially in the city of Seattle. Just recently, I had a little kerfuffle between a landlord client of mine and a tenant. The city of Seattle rules had changed, and I think there were 20 accusations that we violated these new rules, even though my guy had done the same thing he'd done, for the last half a dozen years. It was crazy just trying to figure out what these new rules meant. I mean, every rule introduces a new ambiguity that two attorneys can come up with different, interpretations for.
So Adam, last thing I wanted to ask you about were sort of common mistakes that can get landlords in hot water. What are some common things you see out there that trip people up?
So, outside of COVID, right, which has been a kind of a difficult for everybody, the normal course of business, both from, the calls that I field from lots of landlords, from my clients' experiences over the years, and also my experience as a landlord. Common mistake number one is relying on hope to get your non-paying tenant to pay. Well, if I just wait a few days, they'll pay, everything will be fine, we'll go back to the way things were. It never works, okay? You have to have that uncomfortable conversation with your tenant. You have to get that tenant to commit to a certain course of action that is acceptable to you. And if they break those promises, more than 2 or 3 times, you have to get them to move out. And whether that's through eviction or through what we call cash for keys, give them some money to move out. The reason they're not paying rent typically is they don't have the money. That's obviously not your fault. It may or may not be their fault, but as a landlord, you can decide when to be compassionate, and especially now, right, with COVID. But ultimately, this is an investment for you, and you can't have a non-paying tenant for very long before you chew into, that small profit that you're making, even over the course of a year. Common mistake number 2 is absentee landlord. So if you are not at your rental, it is out of sight, out of mind. If you let 3, 4, 6 months go by before you go put eyes on the rental, there are going to be what I refer to as unreported problems. Okay? A decent written lease is always going to say the tenant is required to keep the clean, or the property clean, and that the tenant is supposed to report any problems, especially property damage, to the owner. And when you have a tenant who maybe isn't keeping things clean, right, or you have a tenant who breaks something, they're not going to self-report that stuff. And you just don't know what's going on there unless you go and lay eyes on it. I have maybe 6 or 8 years ago, maybe more like 8 years ago at my rental, we had a shower, shower enclosure, and the walls were tile. And in the tile, application, the installer had put a soap dispenser, built into the tile. And at some point, somebody knocked that soap dispenser off. And so there's just this blank spot in the wall that actually had a hole in it. So every time somebody took a shower, there were gallons of water going into the wall. Okay. And, I kind of give the tenants the benefit of the doubt. They probably didn't know that was going on. They didn't maybe know that property damage was happening every time they took a shower. But they knocked it off. They never told me about it. It was like that for some undetermined amount of time, sufficient to destroy the bathroom. And so I got a $10,000 bill to rebuild, all the bathroom walls and new surround and all that stuff, right? And if I'd been down there a little more often, just paying attention and poking my head around, obviously not invading anybody's privacy. We really don't actually have kitchens and bathrooms are the big thing. Okay. We don't really care what's going on in a bedroom. There's not water is the biggest enemy of a landlord. So, and my third common mistake is insurance. Assuming your insurance is adequate. I'm not an insurance salesman. I know more about insurance than the average person from dealing with construction claims and other property damage claims, and obviously having my own coverage. But a lot of people don't have the right coverage, and that subject is way too broad to address really in any meaningful way here, except that, my advice is find a highly qualified insurance agent and spend time with that insurance agent every year. It can be a little bit difficult to determine who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't. So, whether it's a trusted friend or a property manager is a great resource because they're dealing with dozens or more properties, and they, over the years have figured out who knows what they're talking about on the insurance end and who doesn't. Or an attorney. You have to get to a highly qualified agent. And typically I will recommend not a captive agent where they only sell one carrier. You want to go with an independent agent. An independent agent, their duties run to you as the insured. If you go to farmers, their duties run to farmers, not the insured. Okay. The other thing, you don't have to know everything about insurance, but you do need to either read the policy, which can be incredibly difficult. It's totally archaic, and you have to read it a bunch of times even to start to understand what they're talking about. But really talking to your agent about these things is more appropriate in this context of figuring out what each coverage does. You don't have to know everything about each coverage, but when I say, liability, when I say property damage, when I say, loss of use or, ALE is a residential coverage, alternative living expenses. You need to at least know what that is generally.
All right, Adam, as we conclude here, I just want to really thank you again for spending some time with us. And you're an absolute wealth of knowledge, and always appreciate being able to count on you for advice and to have somebody to refer people to. Sounds like as we sort of wrap this up, you can absolutely go it alone. But the bottom line is really having some advocates in your corner to kind of help you through it. You're not expected as a landlord to know everything, but at least to know where to get good answers in order to avoid any major problems of liability with the tenants, with the law, etc. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, there are so many requirements. It is easy to get crossways with something that you didn't even know about. Whether you knew about it or not, you're held to that standard. I mean, there are literally hundreds of laws that you are required to comply with. You got to figure it out. You got to, and you just can't do it on your own, right? You got to find resources.
Right. Well, thank you, sir, for being one of those resources. We really appreciate it. Now let's talk about time. Now let's be real. Nobody wants to field phone calls in the middle of the night because a toilet's overflowing, or a pilot light is not lit on a water heater, or furnace goes out, or the oven goes out on Thanksgiving. There are two aspects of how you spend your time on a monthly basis as a landlord. And it's a matter of sheer quantity of time every month that you're talking about rent or maintenance issues, or if there's issues with a neighbor, let's say, lease renewals. It's just the time that's spent every month in communication in one way or another with the tenant. Number two is this, and even more profoundly, is this kind of always on mentality of a landlord. There's never a time when you can really just turn your phone off. Or just take a vacation and not have to worry about it, because when your tenant calls you, whether you're on vacation or it's 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, you have to answer the phone. There are certain things, there's certain timelines set out in landlord-tenant law to deal with certain issues, and you as a landlord going it alone are responsible for that. Having a professional property manager gives you that time back. That's time that you won't have to worry about chasing rent or dealing with complaints or managing repairs or maintenance to the home. You hand that off to the property manager and you go back to doing you. Whether that's watching reruns of the Tiger King or whatever it is that you enjoy doing, you can sit back, collect that rent, and know that everything is taken care of. Okay, so we've talked about the liability issues, we've talked about time issues. Let's talk about another important issue, and that is money. And here are 4 ways that you're going to net more money by using a professional property manager. First is that a professional property manager has access to better market information. Pricing the rental home is one of the most important parts of the whole process. And if you overprice the rental, understand that every day that you're sitting vacant is money that you're not collecting. And if you overprice a property, that can add up really quickly, and it can be a substantial amount of money. The second piece is just tighter rent collection and adherence to the lease terms. As a property manager, we act as a buffer between you and the tenant. And believe me, property managers have heard every excuse under the sun for why rent is not going to be paid on time. And being able to effectively communicate the terms of the lease, including, and most importantly, rent collection, being able to communicate that effectively with the tenant is very important. And the fact of the matter is, I think that more people get away with things with a private landlord than they would with a professional property management company. And if you get into a situation where unfortunately you have to, start an eviction process, going that alone is not fun, and not knowing the proper steps to do such a thing can really cost you as the property owner in the long run. So having a property manager on your side that can go through that process and knows how to do it within the confines of the law is super important and will save you money. Number 3 are just higher quality tenants. I think one of the things that can make or break an experience for an owner is having a really high quality tenant. So having access to best in class tenant screening, is super important, and just having the years of experience to know who's going to be a good tenant or not for your property. There's a lot of value in that for you as an owner using a professional property management company. Higher quality tenants means less damage, it means fewer problems, it means more money in your pocket at the end of the day. And the fourth thing is reduced maintenance cost. Especially if you're an absentee landlord, having eyes on that property every month, knowing that everything is in good shape, things are taken care of, ongoing maintenance is being handled, just having eyes on the property without you having to lift a finger, having the property manager do that month in and month out is going to save you money in the long run by staying on top of maintenance. Not to mention the fact that we have a list of great vendors that we use that give us great rates. So there's 4 reasons why you're going to net more money by using a professional property manager. Okay, in summary, 3 reasons why you don't want to go this alone: liability, time, and money. However, if you choose to go it alone without a professional property manager, we highly recommend that you find some resources out there that can help you through these different challenges that you may face. One organization that we like a lot is the Rental Housing Association of Washington, which we will link below. If you don't see that, just Google Rental Housing Association of Washington. That is one good way that you can reduce your liability. There's tons of resources from lease agreements to Q&As with attorneys and so on. We definitely recommend building up your base of knowledge before venturing out there on your own. Otherwise, if you're curious about what professional property management would look like for your individual circumstance, we invite you to contact us. We'd love to have a conversation. Thank you again for watching this episode of Behind the Scenes. If you have questions about sales, marketing, property management, we're here for you. You can find us on nearly all social platforms at JanusGroup RE or at our website, JanusGroupRE.com. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.
House goals realized. Janus Group at Remax Integrity.
It's a tooth!